In the first episode, we examined the journey of the hikers, which ended with their mysterious deaths during a winter trip near the Ural Mountains in Russia. The theories that emerged as a result of the investigations were quite interesting. Were the local Mansi people of the region responsible for their deaths? Did they accidentally witness a secret plan of the Komitet Gosudarstvenoi Bezopasnosti and were killed because of it? Or was it a military experiment that led to their deaths? The conclusion that emerged from the investigation was that the cause of the hikers' deaths was an overwhelming force they could not overcome. Today, we will find out what kind of force this was. February 2nd, 1959 is the day when all 9 members of the Dyatlov group died. When none of the families received letters from them, and it was known that they hadn't stopped at any settlements along the remaining route, on February 19th, the Institute appealed to Soviet authorities for help in finding the missing students. On February 26, 1959, that is, 24 days later, the first trace belonging to them was found during extensive search operations. The tent they had set up. In the last images of them, on February 1st, they appear to be preparing to set up a tent on the slope of the mountain. The thing they placed at the edge of the tent in the picture was still in the same position when the tent was later found. This shows that the place where this photo was taken was the last place they set up the tent. When the tent was found, it was completely covered with snow. There were also some cuts in the tent that had been made intentionally. Did this show that someone from outside had attacked them? Even more interestingly, almost all of the group members' equipment and personal belongings were left in the tent as they were. Backpacks, blankets, warm clothes, and some shoes, as if something had scared them and made them leave the tent in a hurry, because they went down into the forested area without taking anything with them, and this led to their demise. Searches began immediately on February 27th. The ground was checked with long sticks, thinking that the falling snow would cover them. About 1 kilometer down the slope in the direction the footprints led, under a cedar tree, the partially snow-covered bodies of Doroshenko and Krivonishenko, lying side by side and wearing only their underwear, were found. Shortly after, on the path leading back to the tent, Igor Dyatlov and Zinaida were found. Only 4 bodies were found during the initial searches. The others were still hidden under the snow, were waiting to be found. On March 5th, 1959, the 5th body, Rustem Slobodin, was found. He was lying face down in about 7.87 inches of snow. The other 4 people were found by chance on May 4th, 1959, in a riverbed after the snow had melted, when a Mansi locale was out with his dog, about 3 months after they lost their lives. This is a 3D rendered image of the last 4 hikers who were found. Dubinina is kneeling on her knees, pressing her chest against the rock. Kolovatov and Zolotaryov's bodies are on top of each other, embracing each other. Maybe they embraced each other hoping to get warm, or maybe to suppress their fears. 9 hikers walked toward death in the Ural Mountains, unaware of the fate that awaited them. When we look at all these events, there are some questions that need to be clarified, and we need to find the answers to these questions. Suspicions initially turned toward the locals living nearby. The Mansi, one of the 45 indigenous peoples living in Russia, had survived for hundreds of years by hunting, fishing, and reindeer herding. The place where the hikers were found was Death Mountain, known as a sacred mountain to the Mansi people. According to the theory, it was thought that Mansi hunters had eaten magical mushrooms used in shamanic rituals, were under hallucinogenic effects, and when they saw the students entering the sacred Mansi lands, they attacked them in a frenzy. Valery, a Mansi native, said, "If one of our people had committed a crime, they would have thrown all of us in prison, because back then the government was more ruthless. He said that cursed places, areas with negative energy, and rituals were all made up by the media. After this incident, many Mansi natives were arrested and interrogated. No evidence was found. In this region, where many trips have been made for 30 years, nothing has ever happened until now. The idea that the Mansi were involved in this was shelved. 80-year-old Sanka is one of the few Mansi natives who survived from that time. He remembers seeing something unusual in the sky while collecting wood in February 1959. There are many theories from different people about what was seen in the sky, but none of them have been confirmed by Soviet Russia or other relevant authorities. When we look at what happened to the Dyatlov group, an extraterrestrial attack or intervention does not seem logical or likely. There is no mention or hint of this in the hikers' notes. However, the rocket tests conducted by the Russians at that time were being kept secret. These tests, which were secretly conducted both for space exploration and for use in war, perhaps by chance, by pure coincidence, had taken place near the point where they were. When Zolotaryov's camera was examined, some of the photos that came out were quite interesting. The pictures were taken at night. In one picture, only the heads of some of his friends are visible, and there is a bright light in front of them. In another shot, a place about 32 feet away is illuminated with a flashlight, and in another shot, it is thought that they got closer to this spot. It looked like there was a piece of shattered metal where the flashlight was pointed. It is said that an airplane or a rocket can be seen in the other footage that was taken. However, at night, an airplane can never be seen brightly and clearly in an area where there is no light source. Other than that, while this object looks like an airplane in this footage, it appears in completely different shapes in the other two recordings. It's as if it was filmed up close, like a piece that fell to the ground much closer to the camera. The pictures were images taken by Zolotaryov before February 1st. The theorists thought like this: an explosion occurred somewhere near them. Maybe it was a military test. The group saw something they weren't supposed to see and recorded it on camera. Afterwards, they were followed and killed near the Ural Mountains. This theory could actually have been reasonable, but the way the group was scattered across the terrain, the manner of their deaths, and the fact that there were no traces except for theirs invalidated this theory. No one in the group mentioned an explosion or anything unusual in their diaries. The only thing that could shine bright enough to be seen on camera in the darkness of the night would be a fire. In fact, in some photos, you can see that some embers are about to go out. The group probably lit a big fire. The first footage taken was its brightest moment. Later, some pieces they threw into the fire burned and scattered around. It's not known whether Zolotaryov took these images to capture a beautiful fire or as a test shot for night photography. While the investigation was ongoing, there was a development regarding the tent. It was determined that the cuts in the tent were made from the inside, not from the outside. This showed that the hikers had so little time that they couldn't open the entrance of the tent and get out. And they wanted to tear the tent and get out immediately. So what was it that made them flee from the tent? We showed that the Dyatlov group carried a stove and used it to keep warm. Their immediate escape from the tent brought to mind the idea that maybe there was a fire or smoke while they were sleeping. So tearing the tent and escaping would have been the most logical choice. But there were no burn marks inside the tent. If that were the case, the tent wouldn't have been found intact. This time, the possibility that they escaped from smoke can be considered. But if that were the case, it wouldn't make sense for them to leave their belongings in the tent and go down to the forested area. Because they would have checked the smoke and gone back into the tent, there was definitely something else going on here. It was strange that the hikers set up their tent on an open ridge on February 1st. This was one of the places where the wind was the strongest. There was only one reason for them to stop here. Because of the strong storm and fog, after climbing this high, we didn't go back down and lose our way. They didn't have detailed maps and didn't know the shelter points. At this point, they couldn't dare to continue. They dug a pit, set up the tent, and started to rest. The snowstorm continued, and after a while, the mass of snow on the slope became critical. When the avalanche weighed at least several tons, it started to fall as a slab. Realizing this, the people in the group immediately made holes from different points inside the tent and got out through them. They were lucky at that moment because the slope had prevented the avalanche from coming quickly. Without taking any belongings with them, they started to descend toward the wooded area with only what they had on. The storm was blowing downhill from the top. Thanks to this, they moved quickly. The superficial wounds and scratches on some of their bodies occurred as a result of falling while leaving the tent and walking on the way. They wanted to turn back halfway down the road, but the tent was completely covered with snow and visibility was very low due to the storm. Besides, climbing uphill against the strong headwind could have been their end. In these conditions, the only way for them to survive was to get down to the forest as quickly as possible, rush to shelter, and spend a warm night until the weather improved. The group of 9 wanted to light a fire together under the cedar tree. However, due to the insufficient equipment they brought with them and the damp tree branches, they had difficulty lighting a fire. When they saw that they wouldn't be able to do it, the 4 best-dressed people moved deeper into the forest to find dry branches and wood. After walking a bit further, they came across a pit and fell in, and 2 people were seriously injured. Their ribs were broken. Because of this, they all had to find a more sheltered place to protect themselves from the cold. The other 2 people who got away with minor scratches dug a pit to protect themselves from the wind. He gathered wood and tried to start a fire. Meanwhile, Zinadiev, Rustem, and Igor Dyatlov, 2 of the 5 people waiting at the cedar tree, wanted to return to the tent and reach the supplies when they didn't hear any sound from the group that went into the forest, because this was now the only way to survive. Doroshenko and Krivonishenko, who stayed at the cedar tree, couldn't make it to the tent because their clothes were the least resistant to the cold. Then they made a small fire, but this wasn't enough to warm them. The wind was so strong that they tried to shield the fire with their hands. They brought their hands so close to the fire that some burns formed, but they didn't even notice because of the cold. And there, and with the sharp pain of the cold, their lives came to an end. They were the first people in the group to die. The other 3 people heading toward the tent couldn't withstand the strong wind coming from the opposite direction, and there he was helplessly condemned to death. The 4 people who remained in the forest were still alive. When one of them wanted to go back and find out what happened, he saw the lifeless bodies lying under the cedar tree. He took off their clothes, laid them side by side, and slowly walked away. When he returned, they spread the clothes over the snow to protect themselves from the cold. But they were so unlucky that the snow piled up above fell into the hole they had dug. All 4 of them had to come to the riverbank, where there was less snow. It was as if death would never leave them alone. Because of the cold, the storm, and the impossibilities, the 4 people, helpless and exhausted, embraced death in their final moments, standing close to each other. The search and rescue teams first found 2 lifeless bodies under the cedar tree. Then, on the path leading to the tent, they found the other 3 bodies. The 4 people who were in the riverbed could only be found 3 months later in May, when the snow melted. Zolotaryov and Dubinina were missing their eyeballs. Also, Dubinina's tongue was missing. Some of them were missing the tips of their noses and the soft tissues on their faces. The reason for this was probably that the only exposed part of their bodies, their faces, had been damaged by hungry animals. According to the data from the meteorological station, on the night of February 1st, 1959, just 1 day before their deaths, a heavy snowfall that lasted at least 10 hours had turned the wind into a blizzard, and the temperature had dropped to minus 40 degrees. As can be seen from the last photographs of the group members, if we take into account the snowstorm that lasted all day on February 1st, 1959, setting up camp on the slope of the mountain was a fatal mistake. Everything started with an idea and ended with a simple mistake, just like in another incident I'm going to tell you about.